Hi, and welcome to my sewing room. My name's Leah, and today I'm going to show you how I turned this pile of berry-colored fabrics into a stunning quilt full of tilted charm and patchwork fun. I'm calling this one Tilted Berries. It's a quilt full of beautiful berry tones, playful tilted blocks, and a light, low-volume background that makes the colors really pop. The fabric line is called Berry Crush, and it's the signature Island Batik collection for Jennifer Thomas of Curlicue Creations. I love the colors in this fabric line, so when Jennifer asked me if I wanted to help promote her fabric in her October blog hop, I jumped at the chance. She sent me enough fabric to make all the blocks, and Lumen Fabrics filled in the rest by sending me the backgrounds from their Island Batik Neutral lines. I finally had a chance to finish up the pattern, and today I'm going to share that with you and give you a few tips on how I put this quilt together. I'll have a link to the free pattern in the description below, and you can use that to follow along as I go. And at the end, I'll show you how to make a simplified version if you want to make your own without paper piecing. So let's jump right into the main quilt. I used all the fabrics from the Berry Crush line, as well as several Island Batik Neutrals. But for the ease of explaining the pattern, I'll split the prints up into groups. While some of these could be light or dark, I ended up making two groups. I made 6 light pinks, and then I made 6 dark pinks, and then I picked out 6 purple prints, and 6 different neutral prints. The light and the dark pink all need 1/8 of a yard, as well as 5 of the purples. The last purple is also the border and the binding, so that print needs an extra yard for that. So a total of 1 1/8 yard for that last purple. For the neutrals, neutral 1 and 2 are for the main block. You need 1/2 yard of each of those. Neutral 3 and 4 are for the sashing units, and you need 3/4 yards of each of those. Neutral number 5 is for the cornerstones, and you need 1/2 yard of that. And neutral number 6 is for the first inner border, and you need 1/3 of a yard of that. I use both traditional piecing and paper piecing for this quilt, but if you don't like paper piecing, you can still put this whole quilt together the traditional way, since these are all basic shapes. For me, paper piecing was helpful, so I could get these small, tiny pieces nice and straight. For the main blocks, I used a template to cut out my pieces. And even though the pieces here are an odd shape, I went ahead and I left the fabric as triangles, and I would trim the extra wings off later. These are the cornerstones. I cut these out using templates as well. The neutrals for the color stones are all the same, but I still need one shape like this and one like this. The sewing method is very similar to the main block, with the large triangles sewed on first and then the sides trimmed off. Again, if you want, you can paper piece these if you prefer that method. Next is the sashing blocks. These are the ones I planned to paper piece. I had all my papers ready to go, but if you don't want to paper piece, you can also use templates. These templates match these, this one matches here, this one goes with this pile. These extra fabric strips are for the skinny strips here. You could also use a template for these, but I'm going to paper piece them just because of how skinny they are, and I feel like it'd be easier for me to get those nice straight lines with these small pieces with paper piecing. This is my inner border, my outer border, and then my binding. So everything is ready, and I'm going to start with the easy block, the main block. But before I go to the sewing machine, I'm going to pair up my colors. I have 6 purple centers, and I'm going to pair them with the pink rectangles that go around them. I don't want the same prints together. A little bit of rearranging, and I was happy with the groups. And these are my pink centers, and I did the same thing with them, and I paired them up with the purple rectangles. The rectangles have 4 pieces in their piles, 2 short-sided pieces and 2 long-sided pieces. They're stacked on top of each other, so it really only looks like one long one, but there are 4 pieces there. This print did have some purple in it, but I decided to use it as a pink print so I could get enough to have 6 prints. The flowers were big enough to help it pass as a pink, and when I add the dark purple border strips around it, it will show more as a pink. Okay, we'll go with that. To the sewing machine! I started with the main blocks. They sew together similar to a courthouse steps block, but only with 1 row. Then I added the background triangles. Since the triangles are so much larger than the square unit, I had to make sure I lined them up right. To do that, I folded the square in half and made a crease. Then I folded the triangle in half and made a crease on that as well. I put the 2 creases together, pinned, and then sewed the triangle on. I did that for both sides, and when I pressed them open, it looked like I had a colorful TIE fighter from Star Wars. Well, those wings couldn't stay. So I lined up my ruler with the straight line of the square and I cut them off. Then I added the other triangles in the same way, folding in half, matching up, and then sewing. Once all those were on, I trimmed up each block to an 8.5 inch square. Since there were only 12, it went pretty fast. Next was the cornerstones. I didn't need to add any extra layers to the square, so all I had to do for those was add the triangles. I sewed those in the same way I did the big ones, folded them in half and lining up. But this time around, I didn't trim the extra wings off until after I sewed on the other side triangles. Since these blocks were smaller, I could line up the second set of triangles easily and trim off the excess with the scissors. A quick press and they were ready for trimming. These units need to finish 3 inches in the quilt, so I trimmed them down to 3.5. Since these are not true economy blocks because of the extra background around the center square, I couldn't use my regular specialty rulers with the fancy lines to help me line them up. But I did have this 3.5 inch fussy cut ruler that had horizontal lines and vertical lines that lined up perfectly with the inner square. That was nice, as sometimes my regular ruler has too many dashes and my eyes start to cross. So I knocked out the easy stuff first, my main blocks and my cornerstones. Next up is the sashing blocks. I saved these sashing blocks for last because I knew they would take the longest and be considered a little harder because of all the fiddly pieces. I split the pinks the best I could into light and dark piles. These are my light pinks, and these are the dark. They are all going to be surrounded with purple. I actually cut 7 purples, but I only needed 6, so I took one out. I have a pink for the center square of my sashing, and it will be surrounded by a thin purple print. Each purple was assigned 2 pinks to go with it, a light and a dark. I started by grabbing a purple and assigning it a light and a dark pink. I wanted to make sure I mixed the prints up, so I laid out all the purples in a row and played around with the pinks till I got the groupings I liked. I kept the dark pinks on top and the light pinks on the bottom to make sure each purple got a light and a dark pink. Again, for the purples, I did not cut out the individual tiny strips I needed to paper piece with. I felt it would be easier to sew them from the strip and trim as I went. Each light and dark print pile has 5 prints, except for one, which will have 6 prints. That will give me the 31 blocks I need for each light and dark pink center. I have my papers cut out and ready, and each of these individual groups will either give me 10 or 11 blocks. The plan was to sew one group at a time, working my way down the line. Before I took each group to the machine, I decided to pick out the secondary skinny pink strips that would go around the purple strips. If I have a light pink center, it will get a dark pink skinny strip to go with it, and vice versa. To help me keep everything organized, first I matched the pink strips with their center block counterpart, lights with lights, and darks next to darks. That way I could easily see which fabrics needed sorting. The next thing I did was flip-flop the light and the dark strips. That way each grouping would either have a light pink center and a dark pink mini strip, or a dark center and a light mini strip. I played and moved the strips around till I got the color combos I liked. For the most part they looked good, but a few were too close in color and I didn't want to double up any pink prints, or have any mirror image pairs. That way I could have more variety visually in these units. Then I took a picture of them just in case anything got messed up. With 3 cats in the house, that is bound to happen from time to time. Normally when I have a lot of the same unit to paper piece, I go ahead and chain piece those. But there was a lot of different colorways going on here, so I decided to chain piece them in groups of colors. Once I got all the colored prints sewn on, I stacked them into groups of 2. The light pink centers and the dark pink centers. At this point, I just need to add the triangles and the side rectangles. This pile will get the lighter neutral print, and this pile will get the darker neutral print. To the sewing machine! I sewed on the triangles with a little help from Bunky. He loves to be up close and personal when doing his inspection job. Next, I need to sew the 1-inch strips to each side. My template has me paper piecing these on, but I didn't feel like I needed the paper piecing pattern to help sew these on. So I went ahead and pulled off all the paper and trimmed all the blocks down to 3.5 inches. Then I added the sides. I should have taken a picture of all the papers on the floor, as it got quite messy. I did have a trash can nearby, but I was watching TV as I did it, and I missed the trash can quite a bit. Even though the 2 smaller units are sewn together to make one sashing unit, I waited to sew them together. I wanted to put them on the design wall so I can make sure I dispersed all the colors and the fabric patterns evenly. I started with my main blocks, alternating purple and pink. Then I added the cornerstones. From there, I added the individual sashing units. My design had the units with the lighter background print surrounding every other cornerstone, so I put those on first. Then I added the units with the darker background to surround the rest of the cornerstones. All I had to do from there was sew the 2 sashing units together in pairs, create the rows, sew those rows together, and then add the borders. Of course, Bunkie had to be front and center for these steps as well. The quilt measures 45 inches wide, which is a little too big for the width of regular fabric. So I split my yardage in half and added a 2-inch pink strip. You can kind of see it here on the long arm. After I put the backing on the frame, I left the room for just a second and Avi could not resist laying on it. I thought if I rolled the fabric a little, he would jump off, but he thought I was playing a game with him. When I finally got him off and started rolling the backing on the frame, he kept attacking my fingers from the back. So he got booted out of the sewing room until the quilting was done. I did some simple quilting, swirly lines, and then alternated with a wavy line. I did these swirls a little tighter than my last few quilts, and I like it a lot. This is also a good pattern to use on a domestic machine, as you can go the full length of the quilt without having to adjust the quilt under the machine over and over. You just sew a line, move the quilt over, sew a line, move it over, and keep it going till you get to the end. With the binding on, I have a cute, colorful little quilt. Since the fabric line is called Berry Crush, and there are some berries in the prints, and my squares are all on point, I decided I would call this one Tilted Berries. When I added the pink strip down the back, I also added a white square for a place for me to write my name and the year I made the quilt. It's a nice built-in label. It would also be a good spot to sew in an embroidered label if you like to make those. Now that I showed you how I made it, let me go back and show you some of the things I changed when I wrote out the pattern and some of the things I would change to make a simpler quilt. First, I would not use a template for the squares in my main block. When I designed the block in EQ8, the center squares came out to odd sizes like 1 1/16. But I didn't really need such odd sizes since the final square doesn't go all the way to the edge of the block like a traditional economy block. There's a neutral zone around it. This left me with some room to play around with, and I changed the center square to 2 3/4, which is an easier size to cut out. I updated the numbers in my pattern and cut out a second quilt to test my math. But this time I used Christmas colors, which is why these samples are red and green. I also simplified the measurements for the pieces that go around the center square, eliminating their odd size as well. These pieces are now 1 3/4 by 2 3/4, and the longer rectangle is 1 3/4 by 5 1/4. Here you can see my green and red version sewn to the center square. It's a small difference that doesn't affect the overall look of the block, but it makes cutting things out so much simpler. I did the same for the cornerstone block. I adjusted the center square from an odd size and I cut it to 2 1/4 inch square. I also skipped the template for the triangles as well. Instead, I cut squares for all 3 main units and cut all those in half on the diagonal. I kept them the same size as the original though, since I still like to cut a wee bit larger and trim down. This guarantees I get the perfect size block every time without losing a corner due to a wonky cut or an oddly sewn triangle. But if you want to cut the perfect size, I've included the exact size templates in the pattern. To make an even quicker version of this quilt, I eliminated the skinny borders in my sashing units. While I love the look of those skinny pieces, they took me a really long time to make. Over 6 hours just to sew 62 of them. Instead, I turned these units into traditional economy blocks. This does end up having an odd size center square, but you can use a specialty ruler like the Deb Tucker squared ruler or a template to cut those out. And I've included the template in the pattern. These new sashing units do change the look of the quilt, as you can see in this red and green version. But if you're short on time, or you don't enjoy paper piecing, this could be a good option, as it still makes a beautiful quilt. I also made a simpler mock-up of the pink and purple version in EQ8, so you can get an idea of what that would look like with simpler sashing. So there you have it, my Tilted Berries quilt, along with some tips on how to make it, and an alternate version if you want to make one of your own and avoid paper piecing. If you decide to make one, let me know in the comments below. Would you tackle the simple version for a faster quilt? Or try your hand at those tiny paper piecing sashing units? Thanks so much for following along, and until next time, happy sewing!